Good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending. We have it looks like a pretty good crowd here tonight. First in-person meeting in I don't know how long. When I became a member of OWASP, it was all virtual, so it's nice to see everybody in person. Welcome to the Evening of War Stories. As you can see, sponsored by Mandiant. My name is Jeffrey Taylor, in case you didn't know that, but I'm sure you do if you've been on the meetup invite. Feel free to ask any questions whenever you want. The first talk will be recorded and the slides will be shared. The second talk will not be recorded. Please don't take any videos or anything like that. Otherwise, if you have questions, raise your hands. Josephina, right over here, has a microphone. Please feel free, don't be shy. We have two really good speakers tonight, but shortly, OWASP. For those of you who have been here before, you probably know all this by heart by now, but vendor-neutral chapter events used to be web security, but not that any longer, and it's a nonprofit foundation improving the security of software. There are about 240 chapters worldwide in 73 countries, and we facilitate a number of open source software. OWASP software is free to use. Events are always free, except for the conferences. And I already talked to you guys about that. And there's 189 projects, 20 flagship projects. You probably heard about OWASP Top 10, OWASP Top 20, et cetera, et cetera. And there are two chapters in Denmark, Aarhus and Copenhagen. And that's us. That's me, in case you didn't recognize the photo. It's actually not a very good photo of me, but anyway. If you want to contribute, please join, please volunteer. If you have the opportunity or want to do a talk, please contact one of us. We're all here we don't bite, so feel free. And of course, attending events like this is a great help to the chapter. And if you want to talk with us, join, I don't know, bother us, we're on Discord, as you can see up here. Feel free to contact us if you have any questions or want to get involved. This is the agenda for tonight. There will be pizza. It'll be after the second talk. So I know some of you guys will get hungry. Please don't get hangry. We'll try to make sure that you guys are entertained for tonight because we have two really good speakers. And we'll end about 8 p.m. or 20, as you guys say here. We'll also send out a feedback link for you guys to give us your feedback. And please, if you could, take 1 or 2 minutes to answer it because it's very important for us to find out if what we're doing makes sense. And if you enjoy the talks we give, otherwise it kind of becomes a waste, right? You guys won't attend in the future. So we have Magnus and we have Linus tonight. So I'll allow them to introduce themselves. And thank you guys. Good to see you.
One quick comment. I'll be taking a few pictures tonight.
Right.
So if you prefer not to show up in any photos, can you please raise your hand? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to take a picture so I know which one it is.
And state your names.
I work with GDPR on the daily, so I'll be able to start it. So raise your hand if you don't want to get pictures.
And then Magnus, before you start, I just remember that we have Uwe from Copenhagen, who will give just 1 minute, and then we'll start with Magnus. Thank you. You can use this one.
Okay.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Ove. This is just a 1 minute short introduction of a monthly meetup we have in Copenhagen run by volunteers the last Sunday in each month. It's a dual purpose meetup. People can come and get advice about privacy and security, and then it's a very friendly community. Everybody can join in. So it's the last Sunday in each month. It will be a couple of Sundays from now. So just for your information, you're all welcome, and they make a very good coffee.
Thanks. So without further ado, Magnus, you're up, stage right.
Thanks. Is my audio okay? Good. All right, so for many years, organizations has been improving and hardening the perimeter a lot. And a few years back, a lot of organizations realized that they had to harden and improve the security of the internal systems as well, not just the perimeter. So getting that inside, getting that initial access, 5 years ago, maybe pretty easy. Many different phishing payloads, phishing emails typically would work. These years, it has become harder. Therefore, I thought that it would make sense to talk a bit about some of our experience at Mandiant. And therefore, I'd like to give you this red teaming deep dive, so to speak, and do a case study of a particular phishing payload that we have been using recently. But first, a bit about me. So, as I said, my name is Magnus. I'm a red teamer at Mandiant. I am so fortunate that I'm part of the team that almost solely do red teaming and research. So, I'm really happy about that. And of course, I'd like to thank my employer, Mandiant, for sponsoring me and giving me the time to create this content for you guys and giving me time to come present. So first, we're going to do a bit of overview. We're going to zoom out a bit, get that drone footage, drone perspective on the payload. We're going to look at it from above, see the individual components. And after that, we're going to zoom in and do a breakdown of each individual step in part of the chain. And then we'll have some demos as we go along, try to show each individual step in the payload. But first, a bit of a disclaimer, because when we're talking about getting access, we're talking about circumventing defensive controls, technical controls that are meant to keep us out. So when we talk about what's a good payload and a bad payload, we should take that with a grain of salt and apply it to a specific defensive security stack. So I don't claim that what I'm going to show you today is in any means the best. I just think it has some interesting properties. So for specific organizations, it could be really good. For others, it could be really bad, of course. Even as the threat landscape changes over time, the defensive nature also changes, of course. So for me, working primarily offensively, that's my main focus. So just to reiterate a bit, the attack life cycle, we're of course talking about phishing, we're talking about getting in. So we're in the first few phases here. So this is pretty much it. This is the components for this particular payload that we used. So now I've shown the slide. That's it. Thank you for today. So as you can see, we have some different elements, and that's what we're going to spend the next part of my talk to dive into each element and talk about some different options. Yeah, and as said, feel free to ask any questions. Just raise your hand, and I'll be happy to answer a question. So I like to start at the end. So as you can see here from the bottom one, the DLL called nothing to see here.dll. Step number 5. So what we're going to do here is we want to apply what is a pretty old technique, actually probably one of the oldest attack techniques in Windows, called DLL search order hijacking. Different companies call it different things. I've heard someone call it DLL sideloading. I think that's something else. So I'm going to use the term DLL search order hijacking. So a brief definition. So this is a quote from the MITRE attack framework. Adversaries may plant Trojan dynamic link libraries in a directory that will be searched before the location of a legitimate library that will be requested by a program, causing Windows to load their malicious library when it's called for by the victim program. So what does this mean? It means that if an application wants to use some shared functionality, for example, if Notepad wants to write the file, then Notepad is not going to open a file descriptor directly on the hard drive and start pumping data to it. It's going to request the operating system to do it. So it's going to want to use some operating system functionality, some APIs, and those are stored in libraries. So to give an example, so when you ask, for example, when Notepad asks the operating system to get disk I/O functionality, the operating system is going to start looking for the specific DLL in specific places. And this is the search order. And I've removed a ton of other technical things around this order, which I don't think are super necessary for this talk today. So try to strip it down a bit and make it more eatable, so to speak. So the first directory that is going to be searched will be the directory where the application is loaded. from where the application is loaded, which means that the actual location of the exe file where it is stored on disk. Secondly, it's going to look in system32, and then the 16-bit system directory, the Windows directory, and then the current directory. So the current directory and the directory from where the application is loaded is not the same. The current working directory is the location from the current working directory of the parent who calls the actual process. So that could actually be different. And then lastly, any folder directory in the path environment variable will be checked. So as I've highlighted on the right, the first one could be writable, depending on where it is, of course. And the second last and the last, of course, could also be writable. System32 is system in Windows typically not writable by low privileged users. So if we want to do search order hijacking, we basically have two questions we need to answer. What application do we want to target? Meaning, which application's loading of library do we want to put ourselves in the middle and hijack that search order flow? And secondly, of course, which DLL? And there are many different options, so I've tried to look on some of the options which are typically commonly present. And I think there are two good ones. There's OneDrive and there's Microsoft Teams. So for what I'm going to show now, I've chosen OneDrive, but I could have just might as well have chosen Teams. I've just chosen OneDrive. So we fire up Task Manager, we see that OneDrive is running, because this is a default Windows installation. We right-click, choose Open File Location. An Explorer pops up and shows us that OneDrive is actually stored, as you can see, in the App Data folder. So the App Data folder is a local hidden folder in the current user's home folder, so to speak. And since it's inside the own user's folder, it's writable by the user. So the user will own that folder and have complete privileges over it. And that's basically what I've just been showing here on the right, that the user has write privileges. So now we know a folder where we can drop a malicious DLL. Let's take a look at which DLLs that could potentially be loaded by OneDrive. So we fire up Process Hacker. We look at OneDrive.exe, and then we specify the modules tab here, and then we're going to see a list of all the loaded modules by OneDrive. So in this example, I'm going to take a look at CredUI, which is here, which, as you can see, is a DLL from System32 directory. So if we take a step back and remember the search order that Windows uses, I'm just gonna give just an example of how Windows would load CredUI.dll. So first, it would look in the directory from where the application is loaded, and as we just saw, that's in the app data subdirectories, right? Is it there? It's not. Then it's gonna look in System32. Is it there? Yes, it is. Great. The rest is ignored, and then CredUI from System32 is loaded. If we fire up Process Manager and view OneDrive while we start OneDrive, we're actually going to see all of this. We're going to see that it's first looking in the app data subfolders, and then it's not going to find it because it's not there, and then it's going to look in System32. So, and as you probably can recall, the app data folder is writable by us, so this is perfect. We have a DLL which is going to be loaded every time OneDrive boots, and the location where OneDrive searches first is writable to us. So we can actually put our malicious DLL there. Perfect. So we fire up Visual Studio, we make a test DLL, just a simple DLL to verify our assumptions here. We add a message, some code that attempts to spawn a message box. Is this readable? Okay, yeah, good. So let's do that. We compile the DLL and we put it in the directory, and then we start OneDrive. This doesn't work. It won't get loaded. And the reason for this is that if we think a bit about why. Why would OneDrive load a lot of different DLLs just by random? No, of course not. It loads them because it wants to use specific functionality inside those DLL. So if we take an application called DLL Export Viewer, and we open the real CredUI DLL, then we're actually going to see that the real CredUI DLL has a ton of different functions that it exports, which is a Microsoft mechanism for DLL to say that I have this and this and this specific functionality, which people can come and load and use if they want to. And probably, as you recall from my DLL, I didn't do anything magical, right? So my DLL does not have that. So when Windows tries to load my DLL instead of the real one, it fails. So just doing this doesn't work. So that's it. Phishing is hard, don't do it. Okay. So what we can do instead is that we can use this specific syntax, which is a way to tell the linker, when we compile the DLL, to tell the linker to add a specific export to my DLL, which specifies that I have the intended functionality, but it's actually over here in the real one instead. So this is known as export forwarding. So on the bottom, you will see the real one, the real CredUI DLL in System 32. You can see on the left the function name that it exports, and on the second column you can see the actual address of that specific function. This is what applications use to use the right functions. And on the top you'll see my malicious DLL. My malicious DLL has all the same function names, but the address is specified here as a path to another file that contains the DLL. So this is completely valid. It's a Windows feature, and it works. Demo time. Can you see this? So I take my DLL, I write it to the drive, I rename it, I start it, and we get our message box. So the basic mechanism is in place. Great. So we have our payload, right? Let's just send it off to the victim, and we're done. So that was the last step. So the overall goal of this payload that we're showcasing here today is to plant this specific DLL with a specific name in that specific location. That's the end goal. So please keep that in mind. So now we have the fifth and final step in place. Let's look at number 4. Making the move. So Windows has for a very long time had a component known as the Windows scripting host, which is a runtime that implements 2 different interpreted languages known as JScript and VBScript. So JScript is a language that looks a lot like JavaScript, and it's actually a dialect of one of JavaScript's kind of older versions, if you want to, that was actually called ECMAScript. So this runtime has been available since 1996. It's really powerful. It can use all the Windows APIs, at least as far to my knowledge. And executing them is easy, just double-clicking. And since they're relatively straightforward languages, and JScript is syntactically very similar to JavaScript, they're quite powerful means of obfuscating any application we write in these languages. So it seems like for some purposes, ideal language if we want to put executable code that is clickable easily on a Windows system. So this is an example of a JScript file that is just going to find on the first 4 lines we find the target path where we want to write our DLL. On line 6 to 9, we actually copy the DLL locally called nothing to see here, and we copy it to the destination. And then lastly, on line 10 and 11, we fire up Internet Explorer and show like a decoy fake web page. So please keep in mind that this is going to be used in a phishing scenario. So if the user stops and if the user stops and thinks like, what the hell just happened here? I expected something to happen, nothing happened, this doesn't make sense, then we'll probably fail, right? Because then people might react. And we don't want people to click on the this is phishing button or report it or call IT or escalate it to security function. We want them to believe that everything is going as planned and don't worry, right? So we have the JavaScript file. And this might maybe seem a bit trivial and a bit pragmatic, but it actually works pretty nice. So there are online obfuscation websites that you can use to obfuscate your payloads. And as I mentioned, JavaScript is syntactically very similar to JavaScript. We can actually use an online JavaScript obfuscation tool to obfuscate our malicious JavaScript. So on the top, you have my malicious JavaScript, and on the bottom, you have the obfuscated output. So it does the exact same thing. And there are discussions about, and I'd also love to discuss it. Do you guys what do you guys think is most malicious? The top one or the bottom one? What stands out the most? The bottom one? Why? Yeah. Yeah. Because you're an IT pro, Slavi. Yeah, maybe. So we've been using this method quite recently with success. The goal we wanted to achieve here is that we wanted to remove some pretty obvious malicious strings, like the wscript.shell. This is a very, very powerful component that you can use when you use this kind of the WSH Windows scripting host. So we wanted to remove that specifically, and the different ways to do it. This is fast, this is pragmatic. It enables me to continue and do other things. Yeah, sure, just mention. Yeah, of course. There are many different ways to do it. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't claim that I don't in any way claim that this is the best. There could be different ways to do it. Yeah. So of course we always evaluate whether or not we should do it. One thing that we should keep in mind is that if you use encryption that involves entropy, which pretty much all encryption do, more or less, then doing that, having encrypted data will bring the entropy up. So if there are some security tools that does statistical analysis to see how random the content of a file is, then that will give it a high score, of course. And I think certain tools do that. So yeah, there are different pros and cons. And as I've mentioned before in an earlier talk, if you don't know what you're up against, you will probably fail, right? But at least for this demo, this worked fine. And also for the assessment that we did, where we went in pretty blind. So, another demo. So on the left, we have the files. We have the JS file and the DLL. I'm just showing it here. So the decoy fires and the DLL is copied. Great, so we have the step number 5 and step number 4 in place. That's great. Let's just fire these off an email, right? We want to have something better because the JavaScript logo, as you can see there, it looks a bit weird, right? Of course it could work if we have like a social engineering scenario that would make sense for the victim to see a file like this and to actually click it. Then that would be good. But I think we can do even better. And for that, we're going to use Windows shortcuts, which are called LNK files. So LNK files are a bit special because they have some special attributes, at least in my opinion. One of them is that you can change the file icon to anything, pretty much. The second is that even if you specify in Explorer that file extensions should be shown, then they're not actually shown. If you want to see the LNK file extensions of shortcuts, you need to flip a certain bit in the registry somewhere. So they're a bit special. And the third reason why they're nice in a phishing scenario like this is that they offer pretty great flexibility in terms of execution. So the many different paths we could take, if we can just get someone to click on a shortcut, then it's pretty powerful. We can do pretty many different things. And in the end, I'm going to show you some variations of this particular phishing payload here. So let's demo that. So I'm just standardly, in a pretty standard way, creating a shortcut, opening up the preferences. And as you can see here, Windows has pre-filled it with an absolute path, and that of course won't work because the absolute path on the victim's host will be different when he or she receives it. So I'm changing it here to cscript.exe, which is the executable that implements the Windows scripting host runtime environment. The start-in attribute, I changed that to an empty value, which will make it relative upon execution. And then I changed the icon to the icon of Microsoft Edge. And doing these changes allows it to execute as long as the target.js file is in the same directory locally, regardless of what the absolute path is. Another good thing we can do is that we can actually hide the other files so that they're not really visible by default at least. So we mark the other files as hidden. We click it, it still works. The decoy URL is shown. No DLL. It was hidden, right? So it's still there. So let's remove the show hidden files attribute again. It's gone now, not really gone. We can still execute it, it still works. So far so good. So this is great, right? So right now we have a scenario that seems to work, which requires 3 files to be present on the hard drive of the victim user. So how we can actually move them over there? And for one example that we're going to show today is to use a container, and this specific container will be the ISO file extension. Quite recently, I think Microsoft announced that they will be. Okay, I'll get back to that actually. Let's just yeah. So if you put the file inside an ISO, then the file will be encoded in a different file system than NTFS. And with NTFS, files can have what is known as the mark of the web, which is a specific piece of data which is set in an alternative data stream. And we're going to look a bit more about that later. Another reason why ISOs are interesting is that they're automatically mounted when you click them, which means that they're basically accessible from the file system. And then lastly, of course, which is a requirement for doing any kind of phishing, is that it seems as if they're lesser known, like if you compare it to maybe zip or 7-zip or other file formats that I think red teamers have been using traditionally, or criminals as well. So ISO seems to be a bit lesser understood maybe, and also for victims that are not necessarily used to seeing an ISO icon. So at least that's just my subjective experience. So I'm just going to demo this mark of the web, what it means and how it works. So here we have this is just GitHub, could be any website. If you try to download a file, now I'm downloading hello.js. So we try to run it directly from the web browser, and we get this warning, right? And we don't want that. We don't want our phishing victim to have that warning. So if we look in the properties, we'll see this security notice at the bottom. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, the mark of the web. It basically just specifies that the file was downloaded from the internet, and therefore it could be dangerous. So now I'm creating my own text file. So this has not been downloaded from internet. And I'm basically going to copy the content of the malicious one over to the one I'm creating myself manually. And if we look in the properties of the one I created, you'll see that it does not have the mark of the web in the bottom. So even if the content is the same, the mark of the web is not there, which is because the mark of the web is implemented as an alternative data stream, which is a file system thing. And since ISO files don't use NTFS, it can't be there. Great. So this screenshot basically just shows a command you can use to take your files. I'm sorry about the blue here, it's barely readable, I guess. So the files highlighted in green here, we take those and we mark the DLL ones and the JS ones as hidden and put everything inside an ISO we call totally legit. Yeah. So let's try to see how this works and see if we get the mark of the web. Did I start the video? So here I'm just browsing to a web server that hosts the ISO. We download it. So instead of clicking it, I just open the downloads folder. And as you can see, the ISO has the mark of the web. The ISO, very important. But if we double click it, so now it got mounted automatically, it was barely visible. The file inside does not have the mark of the web. So I execute the link, no warning. And if we take a look inside the folder, we'll see that the DLL has been planted. And it still works. So by using a container that does not give files the mark of the web, where the mark of the web is not inherited, we can avoid this security feature, so to speak. So that's great. So now all we have to do is just to get the ISO to the victim and have some convincing story of them clicking it and clicking the file inside it. And I think this is we could just stop here, just use this. Did you raise a hand? Okay, yeah. So we could just stop here and use this, and I think that would probably work in many situations. But it's possible to make this just slightly better, I think, and that is to use HTML to deliver the ISO. So in the HTML, with HTML you can of course embed JavaScript. So now I'm not talking about JScript. I'm not talking about the Windows scripting host runtime language. I'm talking about real JavaScript that runs in web browsers. So with JavaScript you can programmatically create DOM elements which are in part of the web page, and you can programmatically interact with them as well. So doing that, we can actually create an HTML anchor. We can specify the URL, which should be navigated to if you visit the anchor, and we can specify file names, and we can programmatically click the anchor. So what this means is that if we have this code, and we put that in HTML file, and we visit it, then these bytes in this array will be served as a file, as a PDF. The web browser would be told that here's a PDF for you called whatever inside the file name variable. And then that would be served for download automatically if the browser accepts it. So what we want to do is that we actually want to use this to serve our ISO. And I think the primary reason why I want to do this is that from the user's perspective, the user, the victim, won't really see a difference. If we just gave them an ISO link and that downloaded, or if we gave them HTML link and that downloaded an ISO using this trick, they won't really see a difference. But if we look at what happens over the network side of things, so if we use this technique, it would mean that instead of sending an ISO over the network, we'll actually just be sending an HTML file over the network. And as you probably know, most organizations, perimeter devices, they see a ton of HTML files traversing the boundary all the time, right? Employees browse the web a lot. So if you want to have some technical control that should investigate HTML content for things like this, of course you can absolutely do it, but I think it's going to involve, it's going to heighten the complexity of actually catching malicious content significantly in terms of just stripping away all ISOs that traverse the boundary. So, so as you can probably thought about is that the ISO is a binary file, right? We can't just have binary content inside HTML, so we can just encode it with base 64 just to make it work. It's nothing about security. So we can encode it here on line 14, and at runtime at line 15 we decode it. We put it in the blob. We create an ISO. We tell the web browser that it's an ISO file. We give it a name, and then we programmatically click the link. And of course, we take the real ISO, and then we base 64 encode it, and we put that back here. So instead of, it won't really say this, it's going to be a super long string containing the actual base 64 encoded bytes. Okay, so demo time. So this demo is probably going to look exactly like the other one, but instead you'll see here that instead of just serving an ISO, we're serving HTML file. So we navigate it, and we'll see that the ISO is served as a download automatically. It's automatically put in our downloads folder. And if we click it, it will be mounted automatically, and then you've seen the rest of the chain. So we have the link, we click it, it clicks the hidden JS file, which moves to the DLL and spawns it in the Explorer. And you can see it's present, and we click it, and we have code execution. So that's the phishing payload that I thought I'd like to show you today. So to summarize, and this is probably one of the most effective measures to use to phishing today, HTML smuggling, which is the name of the technique to programmatically cause file downloads. It ensures that only HTML traverse the network, the corporate network boundary. There's no malicious executable or DLL or ISO traversing that boundary, only HTML. And it maybe sounds trivial, but that's actually really powerful. We chose the ISO because it doesn't give files the mark of the web. It automatically mounted when clicked, and it appears to be lesser known. I think it has a higher likelihood to work. We used Windows shortcuts because we could change the icon and hide the file extension, and it gives us great flexibility. We chose JS as it is very powerful and easy to use, ease of obfuscation, and lastly we chose DLL hijacking, search order hijacking specifically. So maybe you have noticed that part of this phishing setup, it will actually not result in code execution immediately. If we send this off, people click and do exactly what we hope that they will do, then we're actually not going to get a shell back immediately. And that's because, we're just guessing now, right? That's because OneDrive is probably already running. OneDrive will be loaded next time the system boots. So this has for us, you could view it as something negatively, you could view it as something positively. And I think the positive thing about choosing a setup like this is that if this payload is executed in a test environment, I think it would make sense for some analytical sandbox test environments to try to see that, is there a new thread running? Is there a new process running? And using this technique, there won't actually be anything new running at all. It will only be a file move, a file copy. So that is the badness that we chose to do with this payload. And also another really powerful thing about DLL hijacking is that when OneDrive starts on the next boot, then there's actually no new process. OneDrive was going to be loaded anyway, right? So OneDrive.exe will be shown in the task manager anyway. It was before, and it's still that. There's no new malware.exe or anything, right? There was just the code execution that we added as part of our DLL, where we can do whatever we want inside OneDrive. So in that sense, our malware lives inside OneDrive. And I think that's also pretty powerful hiding mechanism. Of course, if you have any kind of clever system that does some memory, automatic memory controls on one drive to fingerprint it against earlier known whatever.